This video is audio content only. It does not contain any video footage or images. If you are expecting visual content, please be aware. This is intentionally provided in an audio-only format. We recommend listening to the audio rather than watching the screen. Thank you for your understanding. Welcome to an extraordinary journey through deep time as we explore one of nature's most resilient inventions, bony armor. From the ancient seas of the Paleozoic to the sun-scorched deserts of modern Australia, we'll discover how reptiles have repeatedly tapped into a hidden genetic toolkit to suit up for survival. We'll look beyond mere defense to see how these skin bones act as biological multi-tools, regulating chemistry and heat. Prepare to uncover a remarkable story of reinvention, where evolution breaks its own rules to bring the shield back again and again. Chapter 1. The Primal Exoskeleton, when bone lived in the skin. When we think about the human skeleton, we usually imagine it as the deep, hidden foundation of our bodies. We picture a framework of white, mineralized tissue buried beneath layers of muscle, fat, and skin, providing a silent structure for our movements. But if we could travel back hundreds of millions of years to the dawn of vertebrate history, we would find that the very first bones were not hidden at all. In fact, they were the first thing you would see. The origin of bone is not a story of internal support, but rather a story of external defense. Long before the first backbone ever flickered into existence, the ancestors of all modern vertebrates were experimenting with a primal form of protection that sat directly on the surface of their bodies. The fossil record tells us that bone first appeared in the skin, not as a structural internal scaffold, but as an elaborate bony exoskeleton. This occurred shortly after the emergence of the first complex animals during the Paleozoic era, often called the era of old life. This ancient reality seems counterintuitive to us today because we define vertebrates by their backbones. Yet the internal skeleton as we know it did not actually evolve until about 50 million years after the first appearances of bony tissue in the skin. The oldest skin bones date back 475 million years to the Ordovician period, while the internal skeleton did not fully evolve until 50 million years later. For those first 50 million years, the creatures that would eventually become us were essentially soft on the inside and armored on the outside. To understand how this started, we have to look back at the Cambrian period, roughly 530 million years ago. In these ancient seas, the first fish-like creatures began to leave their mark. They looked nothing like the trout or salmon we recognize today. One of the most famous early relatives was a creature called Pichia. It was a small, meek, worm-like organism that lacked both a jaw and a true backbone. However, it possessed a critical feature that would define the future of life on Earth: a nerve cord running down the length of its body. While this cord was not yet protected by a tube of bone or cartilage, Pichia exhibited bilateral symmetry and V-shaped muscles, marking it as a chordate, the group that sits at the very root of the vertebrate family tree. As the millions of years ticked by, these early chordates began to grow more robust. Creatures like Hycuichthys and Millocumingia emerged as the first proto-fish. Hycuichthys was only about an inch long, but it had rudimentary fins and a primitive head. Millocumingia was slightly less elongated and may have possessed a skull made of cartilage. These animals were still soft-bodied, but they were the pioneers of the vertebrate body plan. They lived in a world dominated by massive predatory arthropods and cephalopods, and they were essentially defenseless. The real breakthrough in bone evolution arrived during the Ordovician period, about 475 million years ago. This is when the first true skin bones appear in the fossil record. These early vertebrates are known as the agnatha, or jawless fish. They were finless and moved through the water with a slow, wriggling motion that made them look somewhat like giant tadpoles. But unlike their predecessors, their heads and front sections were encased in heavy bony shields. Species like Astraspis and Arandaspis were some of the most notable examples of this trend. These fish were about 6 inches long and made their living by sucking up waste and tiny organisms from the shallow seafloor. The reason for this heavy plating was clear: survival. At the time, vertebrates were far from the top of the food chain. The oceans were ruled by giant sea scorpions and other large predatory arthropods that could easily crush a soft-bodied fish. The bony armor of the agnatha served as a vital defense against these predators. This armor was not just a random growth, it was a sophisticated biological response to environmental pressure. These plates were made of dermal bone, a type of tissue that forms through a process called metaplasia. Metaplasia is the transformation of connective tissue into bone without a cartilaginous precursor. This stands in stark contrast to the endoskeleton, which typically starts as a cartilaginous model that is later replaced by bone. This dermal bone is the same type of tissue that makes up the roof of our own skulls today, a lingering remnant of our ancient armored past. During this era of experimentation, early vertebrates developed various types of scales that were essentially different versions of skin bone. These included placoid scales, which are tooth-like structures found in sharks, ganoid scales, which are hard and enamel-like, found in modern gars, and cosmoid scales, which were found in extinct lobe-finned fish. Each of these represented a different way to utilize bony tissue on the surface of the body to protection and structural integrity. Throughout the Silurian period, which followed the Ordovician, these jawless fish continued to diversify. Their armor became more refined, and they developed forked tail fins that granted them better maneuverability in the water. This allowed them to escape predators more effectively and move into new habitats. Yet, even with these advancements, they still lacked a fully bony internal skeleton. Their bodies were supported by a flexible rod called a notochord, while their protection remained strictly external. It was a bizarre era of evolution where the outside was hard and the inside was soft, a complete reversal of the modern vertebrate condition. The shift toward an internal skeleton finally began to take shape about 425 million years ago. As the internal skeleton emerged, it didn't immediately replace the external armor. Instead, the two systems existed side by side for a long period. This transition led into the Devonian period, often called the Age of Fish. During the Devonian, the evolution of prehistoric fish branched out in several fascinating directions, showcasing an incredible range of sizes and forms. One of the most significant developments was the appearance of the placoderms, a name that literally means plated skin. Placoderms represented a major leap forward because they were among the first fish to evolve true jaws. This transformed them from simple bottom feeders into active predators. The most famous of these was Dunkleosteus, a terrifying monster that could grow up to 30 feet long. Dunkleosteus was one of the largest fish to ever live, and its head and thorax were covered in massive, thick plates of bony armor. It didn't have teeth in the traditional sense. Instead, the bony plates of its jaws were sharpened into razor-like edges that could shear through prey with incredible force. While Dunkleosteus represented the peak of armored predators, the Devonian also saw the rise of the largest bony fish of all time, Leedsichthys problematicus. Reaching lengths of up to 89 feet, Leedsichthys provides a striking contrast to the tiny 1-inch Hycuichthys that had lived millions of years prior. The diversity of the Age of Fish was further illustrated by creatures like Encotus, the saber-toothed herring, which demonstrated how bony fish were beginning to dominate every ecological niche in the ocean. As the placoderms faded, two other groups of jawed fish rose to take their place. The chondrichthyans, which had skeletons made of cartilage and would eventually become modern sharks and rays, and the osteichthyans, which possessed bony internal skeletons. The bony fish further split into ray-finned fish and lobe-finned fish. It was the lobe-finned fish that would eventually change the course of history. These fish, such as Eusthenopteron and Pandoricthes, had a unique fin structure that contained robust bones. This anatomy would eventually allow them to pull themselves out of the water and onto the land. The discovery of Tiktaalik, a fishapod with both fish-like and tetrapod-like features, provided the missing link in this transition, showing how the internal skeleton was adapting to support weight against gravity. When these early ancestors finally made the move to land, they brought the genetic toolkit for skin bone with them. While many lineages eventually saw their armor diminish or disappear entirely to favor speed and agility, the ability for the skin to form bony tissue remained a recurring motif in evolutionary history. This tissue, known as osteoderms in land-dwelling animals, would resurface again and again across different groups, providing protection and supporting internal chemistry. One of the most enduring mysteries in this story involves the evolution of the turtle shell, which is one of the most specialized forms of skin bone in existence. For a long time, scientists debated whether the turtle shell evolved from the top down or the bottom up. One theory suggested that the shell formed from bony skin plates that fused together over time, similar to the armor seen in some dinosaurs or crocodiles. Another theory proposed that the shell developed from the broadening of the ribs and the backbone. The discovery of an ancient marine reptile called Odontochelys, which lived about 220 million years ago, provided a major clue. Odontochelys, or the toothed tortoise, was a primitive turtle that looked quite different from its modern descendants. While it had a fully developed lower shell, called a plastron, it lacked a solid upper shell, or carapace. Instead, it only had broadened ribs and a thickened backbone. This suggests that in turtles, the belly armor evolved first, likely to protect them from predators attacking from below in the water. It also supports the idea that the upper shell was a result of rib expansion rather than just skin plates fusing together. Further evidence for this rib-based evolution comes from even older reptiles like Eunotaurus, which lived about 250 million years ago. Eunotaurus had significantly thickened and broadened ribs. While it was once thought to be a swimmer, scientists now believe it was a powerful burrower. The broadened ribs provided a stable base for the animal to use its powerful front limbs to dig into the earth. This suggests that the foundations of what would become the turtle shell may have originally evolved as an adaptation for life underground, providing a sturdy anchor for digging before it ever became a shield for protection. This deep history shows that bone is a remarkably flexible material in the hands of evolution. It can be a shield, a tool for digging, or a hidden support system. The skin's ability to generate this tissue is a primitive trait that dates back to the very first vertebrates wriggling through the Ordovician mud. Even as animals grew larger and more complex, and as their skeletons moved deep inside their bodies, the potential for bone to return to the surface was always there, archived within the genetic code. This archived toolkit would later be seen to defy traditional evolutionary expectations, suggesting that once a complex trait is developed, the instructions for it are rarely truly lost. If the skin could produce bone once to survive the sea scorpions of the Paleozoic, what would happen when new, equally dangerous pressures emerged millions of years later? Chapter 2: The Recurring Shield. Evolution's Repeated Success. The story of evolution is often told as a straight line, a single path of progress from one form to another. We tend to imagine that once a complex trait like wings, eyes, or heavy armor appears, it is handed down from a single common ancestor to all its descendants. But the more we look at the history of reptiles, the more we realize that nature is far more inventive and repetitive than we ever suspected. One of the most striking examples of this is the appearance of osteoderms, those bony plates embedded in the skin that act like a suit of natural chainmail. For over a century, scientists debated a fundamental question. Did all armored reptiles inherit their protection from one ancient original source, or did different groups stumble upon the same solution independently? Recent research involving hundreds of living and extinct species has finally settled this debate, and the answer is a testament to the sheer power of convergent evolution. We now know that bony armor did not evolve just once. Instead, it appeared separately at least 13 different times across various lizard lineages alone. This means that if you look at a shingleback lizard from Australia and a beaded lizard from Mexico, you are seeing two animals that look remarkably similar in their rugged, armored texture, yet they did not inherit that armor from a shared ancestor. They are like two different inventors living on opposite sides of the world who both realized that a shield was the best way to survive a fight. To understand how scientists reached this conclusion, we have to imagine the process like a detective arriving at a complex crime scene long after the event has occurred. There is no single perfect witness who saw everything. Instead, researchers had to interview hundreds of witnesses, in this case, over 600 species of living and extinct reptiles. Each species provided a unique perspective, a small piece of the puzzle. Some fossils showed the presence of armor in the distant past, while modern species revealed how that armor is structured today. By combining this massive amount of anatomical data with modern computational methods, scientists were able to reconstruct 320 million years of history. They narrowed down thousands of possible evolutionary scenarios into a single, coherent story that shows armor popping up across the family tree like a recurring theme in a long-running saga. The most intense burst of this armor evolution took place during the late Jurassic and early Cretaceous periods, more than 100 million years ago. This was a time of massive ecological upheaval. The world was dominated by some of the most iconic dinosaurs to ever walk the earth, including the towering Brachiosaurus and the fierce Allosaurus. In this high-stakes environment, being small and soft-bodied was a dangerous proposition. The changing climates and shifting ecosystems created new challenges and new opportunities. For many lizard lineages, growing a layer of bone in their skin was the answer. This armor may have helped them survive the snap of a predator's jaws, but it also likely helped them cope with harsh, arid environments or move into new, more exposed habitats where they previously would have been too vulnerable. One of the most fascinating groups to examine in this context is the worm lizards, or amphisbaenians. These are strange, burrowing reptiles that often look more like giant earthworms than traditional lizards. Despite their specialized underground lifestyle, several distantly related groups of these worm lizards have independently evolved bony skin plates covering their bodies. This is a classic case of convergence. Because they live in similar environments and face similar pressures, namely the need to push through abrasive soil while protecting their bodies, they arrived at the same anatomical solution. Their armor is a tool for a very specific way of life, proving that even when a group of animals becomes highly specialized, they can still tap into that ancient vertebrate ability to form bone in the skin. For a long time, there was one major group of reptiles that seemed to be the exception to this rule: the snakes. Because snakes rely on incredible flexibility to move, constrict prey, and swallow large meals, it was assumed that they had completely abandoned the idea of bony armor. It makes sense, after all. A suit of chainmail isn't particularly helpful if your primary survival strategy involves being as limber as a rope. However, a groundbreaking discovery has recently overturned this long-held assumption. Scientists have found the first evidence of dermal armor in snakes, specifically within a group known as sand boas. These sand boas are fossorial, meaning they spend much of their lives hidden beneath the sand. They have a very specific defensive strategy that involves a tail display. When threatened, these snakes hide their heads and present their tails to the predator. The tail is shaped and colored to mimic the head, tricking the attacker into striking a non-vital part of the body. Upon closer inspection, using advanced scanning technology, researchers discovered that these snakes have developed bony armor in their tails. This armor is composed of small, mineralized structures embedded in the dermis, providing an extra layer of protection for the tail during these encounters. It's a remarkable find that suggests even the most flexible animals can find a use for skin bone when their defensive strategy demands it. This discovery in sand boas supports the idea of a deep developmental homology, a latent genetic ability to form armor that can be switched on when the environment requires it, even after millions of years of being dormant. This theme of independent invention extends back even further into the Triassic period, long before dinosaurs reached their peak. Consider the Aetors, a group of heavily armored reptiles that were the ancestors of modern crocodiles. These creatures thrived about 200 million years ago and looked like a bizarre cross between a crocodile and an armadillo. They were covered in extensive bony armor, with plates spanning from the neck to the tip of the tail. Recent studies of a new species called Garzapelta mulleri have revealed just how complex this armor could be. Garzapelta was flanked by curved spikes and heavy bony plates, suggesting a highly specialized defense against the predators of its time. What is truly interesting is that the armor of Garzapelta shows striking similarities to other, distantly related Aetors. This indicates that even within the same general group of animals, different lineages were independently evolving similar patterns of spikes and plates, a phenomenon known as convergent evolution within a lineage. The water, too, was a theater for this recurring evolutionary play. In the shallow seas of what is now South China, roughly 250 million years ago, a marine reptile called Parahoopasuchus longus was developing its own unique version of armor. Parahoopasuchus was a strange creature that belonged to a group known as Hoopasuchia. It possessed a body wall that was almost completely surrounded by a bony tube. This tube was made of overlapping ribs and gastralia, which are abdominal ribs. Unlike modern turtles, where the shell is a more integrated part of the skeletal structure, this body tube was a distinct evolutionary experiment. Parahoopasuchus also had bony ossicles along its back, which, combined with the bony tube, served as a powerful defense. Scientists believe this level of protection indicates that there was significant predation pressure in the early Triassic oceans. There were large predators in these ecosystems capable of feeding on marine reptiles, and Parahoopasuchus responded by essentially turning its entire torso into a rigid, bony pipe. This heavy plating likely served a dual purpose. It protected the animal from being crushed or bitten, but it also acted as a form of ballast. By weighing the animal down, the armor helped it overcome issues with buoyancy, allowing it to forage more effectively along the seafloor in shallow water. This shows that armor isn't just about defense. It's a multifunctional tool that can help an animal adapt to the physical constraints of its environment. Another marine reptile from the same region and era, Prosaurusfargus yingzichinensis, tells a similar story. It was covered in osteoderms, bony scales and plates that made it appear much more stocky and heavily built than other marine reptiles of the time. The discovery of Prosaurusfargus has forced scientists to rethink the family tree of armored marine reptiles. It suggests that many of these groups, including the turtle-like placodonts and the long-necked plesiosaurs, may be more closely related than previously thought. The wide variety of body armor across these different marine groups suggests that bony plating was a key innovation for any reptile looking to make a living in the shallow, predator-filled waters of the Triassic. What these examples from lizards, snakes, etiosaurs, and marine reptiles show us is that the evolution of armor is not a rare, once-in-a-lifetime event. It is a recurring solution that nature turns to whenever the pressure of survival becomes high enough. Whether it is a sand boa protecting its tail, a worm lizard pushing through the dirt, or a Triassic marine reptile weighing itself down to hunt on the seafloor, the mechanism is the same. The skin's ancient ability to form bone is reactivated. This leads us to a deeper understanding of how evolution works. It isn't always about creating something entirely new from scratch. Often it's about repurposing an ancient genetic toolkit that has been there all along. The genetic instructions for making bone in the skin seem to be a fundamental part of the vertebrate blueprint. While some animals lose their armor to gain speed or flexibility, the potential to grow it back remains hidden in their DNA, like a dormant program waiting for the right signal to run again. This flexibility is what allows reptiles to be so successful across so many different environments. They can be sleek and fast when they need to be, but they can also suit up in a layer of bony mail when the world gets dangerous. The discovery that armor evolved independently so many times also changes how we look at the diversity of life. It suggests that similar environmental challenges will often produce similar biological results. If you have a slow-moving animal in an environment full of sharp-toothed predators, the odds are high that evolution will eventually produce some form of armor. It is a predictable outcome of the laws of natural selection. This predictability is what makes the study of osteoderms so valuable. By looking at how armor appeared in the past, we can gain insights into the specific pressures that shaped those ancient worlds. As we continue to explore the fossil record and use new technologies to look beneath the skin of modern animals, we are finding that the story of reptile armor is even more widespread than we imagined. We are discovering hidden bony structures in species where we never thought to look, revealing a secret world of internal shields and structural reinforcements. Each new find adds another chapter to this epic tale of survival and reinvention. It reminds us that while the path of evolution may meander and branch, it often circles back to the same reliable strategies. The bony armor of reptiles is more than just a physical defense. It is a biological legacy that has been tested and refined over hundreds of millions of years, proving its worth in the oceans, in the deserts, and deep underground. This persistent return to dermal bone set the stage for one of the most controversial and surprising chapters in the history of biology, involving a group of famous Australian lizards that seemingly broke the rules of how evolution is supposed to work. Chapter 3: Beyond Defense, the Biological Multi-Tool. When we look at a crocodile basking on a muddy riverbank or a turtle slowly navigating a garden, it is easy to see their bony exterior as nothing more than a static shield. We call it armor for a reason. It looks like a permanent, unchanging vestige of a violent past, designed solely to deflect the teeth and claws of predators. But modern biology has revealed that these skin bones, or osteoderms, are far more than just passive plates of biological stone. They are actually some of the most versatile and dynamic tissues in the vertebrate body. If the internal skeleton is the body's foundation, the osteoderm system is its Swiss Army knife, a multifunctional toolset that helps reptiles breathe, manage their internal chemistry, regulate their temperature, and even navigate their environments with surprising sensitivity. To understand how dynamic these bones really are, we have to look inside them. Unlike the solid, dry bones we might find in a museum, the osteoderms of a living reptile are often highly vascularized. They are shot through with a complex network of blood vessels, making them a living part of the animal's circulatory system. This is most apparent in crocodilians. When a crocodile sits in the sun, its osteoderms aren't just getting hot, they are acting like biological solar panels. The blood vessels within the bone dilate, allowing the sun's warmth to be absorbed into the blood and then circulated throughout the rest of the body. This efficient heat exchange is vital for an ectothermic animal that relies on external sources to fuel its metabolism. Conversely, when the animal needs to cool down, it can move into the water or open its mouth to gap, and the same vascular network helps dissipate excess heat. In the arid landscapes of Australia, the monitor lizards known as goannas have found yet another use for their reacquired armor. While protection from predators is certainly a factor, scientists believe that the dense network of osteoderms in goanna skin may play a crucial role in water retention. In a desert environment, every drop of moisture is precious. By creating a rugged bony barrier just beneath the scales, these lizards may be reducing the amount of water lost through the skin via evaporation. The armor acts as a biological seal, helping the animal maintain its hydration in some of the harshest, driest conditions on Earth. This suggests that the evolution of armor in goannas wasn't just about surviving a fight, but about surviving the climate itself. The physical weight of bone also provides a functional advantage for reptiles that have returned to a marine lifestyle. Beyond the predation pressures of the early Triassic, creatures like Parahupacichus utilized their specialized bony tubes as ballast for foraging on the seafloor. This use of bone as ballast is a common theme in marine evolution, showing how the same material can be repurposed from a shield into a diving tool. Even the way a reptile feels its world can be tied to its armor. Many people assume that a heavily armored animal must be relatively numb to its surroundings, but the opposite is often true. In many crocodilians and some lizards, the skin and the underlying osteoderms are equipped with specialized structures called integumentary sense organs. These appear as tiny, dark pits on the surface of the scales. These pits are connected to a highly developed trigeminal nerve system. In crocodiles, these sensors are so sensitive that they can detect minute vibrations and pressure changes in the water, allowing the predator to track prey even in total darkness or murky conditions. The bone itself is often shaped to accommodate these sensors, with nutrient canals and nerve pathways integrated directly into the mineralized structure. Far from being a suit of armor that cuts the animal off from the world, the osteoderm system acts as a sophisticated sensory array, turning the animal's entire body surface into a giant vibrating ear and touch-sensitive organ. This versatility isn't limited to reptiles. It has even made a rare and surprising appearance in the mammalian world. The spiny mouse, a small rodent found in parts of Africa and the Middle East, was recently discovered to have bony plates in the skin of its tail. This was a shock to biologists because for a long time, armadillos were thought to be the only living mammals with osteoderms. In the spiny mouse, these bony tiles develop about 6 weeks after birth, shifting the skin's structure from a purely keratin-based system to one reinforced with bone. Why would a mouse need armored skin in its tail? The spiny mouse is famous for its ability to shed its skin to escape predators, a process called autonomy. The presence of osteoderms in the tail may provide a structural anchor for this process, or offer a final bit of protection for a vital appendage that is frequently targeted by attackers. It shows that even in mammals, the genetic potential for skin bone can be unlocked when a specific functional need arises. The structure of the armor itself can also vary wildly to meet different mechanical demands. In some lizards, the osteoderms are not solid blocks, but are instead organized into a matrix-like arrangement. Small, individual ossicles can be interconnected by flexible collagen fibers, creating a form of biological chainmail that provides protection without sacrificing the animal's ability to move, twist, and breathe. In other species, like the garter-tailed lizards, the osteoderms are perfectly aligned with the scales in a 1-to-1 ratio, creating a rigid and formidable defense. The ratio of bone to skin, the thickness of the plates, and the way they are linked together are all variables that evolution can tweak to turn the skin into a specialized tool for digging, swimming, or resisting the crushing force of a predator's jaw. Even the chemical composition of the bone can be specialized. Some extinct groups of lizards developed a unique enamel-like tissue on the surface of their osteoderms called osteodermine. This tissue was incredibly hard, providing a level of surface durability that exceeded standard bone. This highlights that armor isn't just about thickness, it's about material science. By experimenting with different mineral densities and tissue types, reptiles have created surfaces that can withstand abrasion from sand, the impact of a fall, or the concentrated pressure of a tooth's jaw. In the world of turtles, the relationship between the skin bone and the rest of the body reached its most extreme conclusion. The turtle shell is an architectural marvel that integrates the ribs, the vertebrae, and the dermal bone into a single, unified structure. But even here, the armor serves more than one purpose. Beyond protection, the shell is a massive mineral reservoir and a vital part of the turtle's respiratory and circulatory strategy. During hibernation, many turtles submerge themselves in the mud at the bottom of ponds where there is no oxygen. They can survive for months in this state, and just like the crocodile, they use the minerals in their shell to buffer the lactic acid that builds up in their tissues. Without the chemical assistance of their armor, these turtles would succumb to their own metabolic waste long before the spring thaw. This multifunctional nature of osteoderms suggests that their recurring appearance in evolution isn't just because armor is good for defense. It's because bone in the skin is a biological multitasker. Once a lineage develops the ability to form these plates, they find they have a tool that helps them manage their heat, their minerals, their buoyancy, and their senses. It is this versatility that makes the osteoderm one of the most successful experiments in the history of vertebrate life. It is a system that allows an animal to be more than the sum of its parts, integrating the outside of the body with the internal needs of the blood, the lungs, and the brain. This complexity is exactly what makes the next chapter of this story so remarkable, as it involves a group of animals that seemingly abandoned this entire toolkit, only to realize millions of years later that they needed it back. Chapter 4: The Armor Comeback, Breaking Evolution's One-Way Law. In the vast, sun-drenched landscapes of Australia, the monitor lizards, known locally as goannas, reign as apex predators. Sleek, intelligent, and incredibly active, they range from the massive parenti to smaller, tree-dwelling specialists. For decades, biologists viewed these lizards as the ultimate example of evolutionary streamlining. Unlike their heavily armored relatives, the crocodiles or turtles, goannas appeared to have traded the heavy protection of bony skin for the advantages of speed, agility, and a high-octane pursuit-hunting lifestyle. They were the stripped-down sports cars of the reptile world, seemingly unburdened by the weight of biological chainmail. However, a series of massive scientific investigations has recently revealed that these lizards are hiding a secret beneath their scales, one that fundamentally challenges our understanding of how evolution works. To appreciate the significance of this discovery, one must look at a concept known as Dallow's law. Proposed in the late 19th century by the Belgian paleontologist Louis Dallow, this principle suggests that evolution is not reversible. The law holds that once a complex biological trait is lost in a lineage, whether it is a limb, an eye, or a suit of bony armor, it cannot be simply re-evolved in its original form. The logic is that complex structures are built by intricate networks of genes and developmental pathways. Once those pathways are discarded or significantly altered over millions of years, the chances of them being perfectly reconstructed from scratch are statistically near zero. Evolution, according to Dallow, follows a one-way street. For most of the 20th century, the history of monitor lizards seemed to support this law. Fossil evidence and anatomical studies suggested that the ancestors of all monitor lizards had completely lost their osteoderms. This loss made perfect sense from an ecological perspective. As active hunters, every gram of weight mattered. By ditching the heavy, bony plates in their skin, these lizards became faster and more flexible. It was a classic evolutionary trade-off. Protection was sacrificed for performance. The first cracks in this narrative appeared when researchers began a massive census of museum collections around the world, including the museum's Victoria Research Institute, the Florida Museum of Natural History, and the Natural History Museum Berlin. Using non-invasive micro-CT scanning technology, scientists peered beneath the skin of nearly 2,000 specimens, some of which had been sitting on museum shelves for over 120 years. The results, published in the Zoological Journal of the Linnean Society in 2025, were staggering. The data revealed that osteoderms are far more prevalent than previously believed, occurring in nearly half of all lizard species worldwide. This represents an 85% increase over previous scientific estimates, suggesting that bony armor is a standard feature of the lizard body plan rather than a rare exception. In species after species, researchers discovered a hidden layer of osteoderms. This was not just a few isolated cases. The study identified osteoderms in 29 different species of Australopapuan monitor lizards, where they had never been documented before. This represents a 5-fold increase in the known cases of armor among goannas. To visualize these hidden structures, scientists employed advanced radiodensity heat mapping. This technique allowed them to see the bone tissue in vibrant detail, with the densest mineralized areas appearing in shades of yellow to red against the darker background of the lizard's soft tissues. These scans revealed that the law of evolutionary irreversibility had been broken in a spectacular and widespread fashion. The prestige of this discovery was further cemented by a subsequent 2026 study published in the Biological Journal of the Linnean Society, the very same journal where Charles Darwin first shared his ideas on natural selection. This second study focused on the evolutionary reconstruction of the goanna lineage, confirming that these lizards had not simply retained an ancient trait, but had actually grown their armor back after millions of years of being unarmored. The timeline of this re-evolution is as fascinating as the bones themselves. By combining fossil records with modern computational models, researchers pinpointed when this armor started to reappear. When the ancestors of modern goannas reached the Australian continent about 20 million years ago, during the Miocene period, they began to grow their armor back. This was a time when Australia's climate was undergoing a dramatic shift, transitioning from a lush forested environment to one that was increasingly dry and arid. As discussed in previous chapters, these plates served as a biological seal for water retention in the arid Australian environment. The goannas did not just stumble back into armor by accident, they reacquired it because it was the perfect tool for their new Australian home. What makes this re-evolution even more remarkable is the specific nature of the armor. The new osteoderms of the goannas are not identical to the heavy, blocky plates of their distant pre-monitor ancestors. Instead, they have evolved a lighter, more flexible form of armor that looks like delicate mineralized chainmail. In scans of species like Rosenberg's goanna, these bones appear as a complex and beautiful network that provides protection without completely sacrificing agility. The distribution of this armor is also highly variable across the group. Some goannas are armored from nose to tail, while others have it concentrated around their heads and necks, or specifically along their tails. In tree-dwelling species like the green tree monitor, the armor is present but distributed differently than in their ground-dwelling relatives. This variability suggests that once the genetic switch for making skin bone was turned back on, evolution began to experiment with it in different ways across different species. It reinforces the presence of the genetic toolkit for skin bone, as discussed in previous chapters. The case of the Australian goannas is the only known instance of a lizard lineage reacquiring osteoderms after losing them entirely. This makes Australia a unique laboratory for studying the limits of evolutionary change. The continent is already famous for its biological oddities, and the armor comeback of the goannas fits perfectly into this theme of unique evolutionary pathways. It suggests that the isolation of the Australian continent provided a set of conditions that allowed life to break the standard rules and find unconventional ways to thrive. The fact that goannas could regrow a complex structure like bony armor suggests that the underlying genetic information for these traits might be much more resilient than Dallow's law would lead us to believe. It may be that the instructions for making osteoderms are never truly deleted from the genetic code. They are simply archived, held in reserve until the environment sends a signal that it's time to bring them back to the surface. Now that scientists have confirmed that this re-evolution has occurred, the next step is to investigate the specific genetic and developmental mechanisms that allowed it to happen. By comparing the DNA and development of armored goannas with their unarmored relatives, researchers hope to identify the exact switches that govern the formation of skin bone. This could lead to a much deeper understanding of how bone tissue grows and how it can be manipulated, with potential implications that reach far beyond the world of reptiles. The goannas have shown us that the history of bone is a story of incredible flexibility, where the boundary between the internal skeleton and the external skin is constantly being redefined. What other lost traits are currently lying dormant in the genomes of the world's most successful survivors, waiting for the environment to flip the switch? Our exploration reveals that bony armor is a testament to evolution's creativity, evolving independently across reptiles for defense, thermoregulation, and more. The re-evolution of armor in goannas challenges the notion that complex traits, once lost, are gone forever, hinting at a persistent genetic toolkit. This underscores nature's ability to repurpose ancient solutions for new challenges, reminding us that the past is often archived within, waiting to be rediscovered. Thank you for listening.